The dust devils danced a jig across the parched earth, mocking Cain's thirst. He shifted in the saddle, the leather creaking a mournful song against the vast, indifferent sky. 3 riders, faces masked by bandanas, materialized from the shimmering heat haze. Claim jumpers. He knew the look, the glint of avarice in their eyes. Cain spat, the brown juice dissolving into the dust. "You boys lost." The lead rider chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "We found what we were looking for." He gestured with a rifle barrel towards Cain's meager claim, a patch of land scratched from the unforgiving earth, barely enough to feed a jackrabbit. Cain didn't reach for his Colt. Not yet. He'd seen men die reaching. That ground's bought and paid for. A shot cracked the silence. It wasn't meant to kill, just to persuade. The bullet whined past Cain's ear, kicking up dust on the other side. Persuasion received. He spurred his horse, a lean Mustang named Widowmaker, into a gallop, the claim jumpers hot on his heels. He was fast, but they were faster. Bullets peppered the ground around him, one clipping Widowmaker's flank. The horse stumbled, nearly unseating him. Another shot found its mark, ripping through Cain's left shoulder. He gritted his teeth, ignoring the burning pain. Ahead he saw it. A stagecoach overturned in a gully. Horses scattered. Robbery. Bad luck piled on bad. He swerved, hoping to use the wreckage as cover. But as he drew closer, he saw something else. A flash of black fabric, discarded near the overturned coach. A nun's habit. Then another sound, distinct from the gunfire. A woman's muffled cry. Cain, vision blurring, slumped in the saddle. He was losing blood fast. He knew he should keep riding, save himself. But the sound of that cry, the sight of the discarded habit, it snagged on something deep inside him, something that wouldn't let him go. He dismounted, swaying a horse, and stumbled towards the coach. The claim jumpers were closing in, their shouts growing louder. He had seconds. He reached the coach and dropped to his knees, peering into the darkness beneath the overturned carriage. That's when he saw her. A woman huddled beneath the seats, dressed in the same black fabric as the discarded habit. Her eyes, wide with terror, met his. He didn't speak, didn't have the breath. He just reached out, grabbed her arm, and hauled her out from under the wreckage. "Up," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "We ride." He hoisted her onto Widowmaker, ignoring her protests. She was light, almost fragile. He swung up behind her, the pain in his shoulder a white-hot brand. He kicked Widowmaker into a gallop, leaving the overturned stagecoach and the approaching claim jumpers behind in a cloud of dust. He could feel her trembling against his back. His grip tightened on the reins. He didn't know who she was, why she was dressed as a nun, or what she was running from. All he knew was that she was in trouble. And he was, for reasons he couldn't quite explain, bound to protect her. He spurred Widowmaker onward, towards the setting sun, towards the uncertain horizon, leaving a trail of blood and dust in their wake. The jarring gallop faded to a trot, then a walk, as Widowmaker crested a ridge overlooking a valley, bathed in the fading light. Below, nestled against a bluff, sat a small ranch house, a single weathered structure with a corral and a few outbuildings. Cain's place, sanctuary of sorts. He slowed Widowmaker to a halt, the horse blowing hard. He swayed, the world tilting around him. He was losing too much blood. He slid off the horse, landing heavily on the ground, the pain in his shoulder searing through him. Hana, still clinging to Widowmaker's back, watched him with wide, frightened eyes. Cain gestured towards the house, a grunt escaping his lips. "Home," he managed, his voice a raw rasp. He led Widowmaker towards the corral, his steps faltering. Hana followed, her black habit swirling around her ankles. She was silent, her gaze fixed on him, a mixture of fear and something else, something he couldn't quite decipher. The ranch was Spartan, a reflection of Cain's self-imposed exile. The house was built of rough-hewn logs, the chinking crumbling in places. Inside, a single room served as kitchen, bedroom, and living space. A small stove sat in one corner, a rough-hewn table, and chairs in the other. A narrow bed, covered with a worn quilt, occupied the far wall. Few personal touches adorned the space. A rifle hanging above the door, a few worn tools, a stack of well-thumbed books. He guided Hana inside, then collapsed onto the bed, his face pale and drawn. He pointed to a tin basin and a stack of clean rags on a shelf. "Water," he croaked. "Clean." He trailed off, exhaustion pulling him under. Hana, understanding his intent, moved quickly. She filled the basin with water from a bucket near the stove and began to clean his wound. Her touch was surprisingly gentle, her fingers light as she dabbed at the blood-soaked cloth. Cain gritted his teeth against the pain, watching her. Her face was etched with worry, her brow furrowed in concentration. She spoke no English, or if she did, she wasn't letting on. Her language was one of soft movements, of careful attention. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the crackling of the fire in the stove. It was a silence Cain had cultivated, a shield against the memories that haunted him. Years ago, he'd been a different man, a talkative man, a family man. But a stagecoach robbery gone wrong had taken his wife and child, leaving him with nothing but silence and the burning need for solitude. He had vowed never to speak again, a promise etched in stone. Hana finished cleaning the wound and began to bandage it with strips of clean cloth. Her hands moved with a quiet efficiency, a practiced skill. Where had she learned such things? What was her story? He knew nothing about her, yet he felt a strange sense of responsibility for her safety. She finished bandaging his shoulder and stepped back, her dark eyes searching his. She spoke finally in a language he didn't understand, a soft, melodic tongue that sounded vaguely Asian. He shook his head, indicating his ignorance. She tried again, this time pointing to herself and uttering a name. "Hana." Then she pointed to him, questioning. "Cain," he replied, his voice rough from disuse. Hana nodded, repeating his name softly. She then gestured towards the animals outside, a question in her eyes. He nodded again, indicating that she should feed them. She moved with a purpose that belied her delicate frame. She gathered hay from the barn, her small hands struggling with the heavy bundles. She watered the horses and fed the chickens, her movements efficient and graceful. Cain watched her from the doorway, a flicker of something akin to hope igniting within him. He saw resilience in her, a quiet strength that mirrored his own. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The vast, empty landscape seemed to press in on them, a reminder of their isolation. Inside the small ranch house, however, a fragile bond was forming, forged in silence and shared hardship. Two lost souls, finding solace in the most unlikely of circumstances, in the heart of the unforgiving West. The wind howled like a banshee around the ranch house, rattling the window panes and clawing at the eaves. Cain closed his eyes, the sound a familiar tormentor, a constant reminder of what he had lost. He saw her face then, Sarah, his wife, her smile as bright as the summer sun. He felt the weight of his son, Caleb, small and warm in his arms. The memory, once a source of comfort, now felt like a branding iron on his soul. He saw them again, caught in the blizzard, the snow a blinding white shroud. He'd tried, he'd tried to reach the cabin, to keep them safe. But the storm had been too strong, the cold too relentless. He had found them frozen, their faces peaceful, as if they had simply drifted off to sleep. He hadn't spoken a word since, not a single sound escaping his lips. Silence was his penance, his self-imposed prison. He opened his eyes, the vision fading. Hana was inside, tending the small fire in the stove. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on her face, highlighting her delicate features. She was a ghost of Sarah, in a way, a fragile reminder of the life he had lost. He pushed the thought away, disgusted with himself. It wasn't fair to her, to burden her with his memories. He shifted on the bed, the pain in his shoulder a dull throb. He watched Hana as she stirred a pot of beans, her movements quiet and efficient. She was resourceful, adaptable. He wondered again about her past, about the circumstances that had led her to that stagecoach, dressed as a nun, fleeing for her life. He knew he wouldn't ask. He had learned long ago that some wounds were best left untouched, some stories best left untold. But her presence, it stirred something within him, a long dormant ember of hope, perhaps, or maybe just a flicker of human connection in the vast emptiness of his existence. He hadn't felt this pull, this sense of responsibility in years. It was unsettling, unwelcome. He preferred the numbness, the solitude. He closed his eyes again, willing himself back into the darkness. But the images persisted. Sarah's smile, Caleb's laughter, the feel of Hana's gentle touch as she cleaned his wound. He saw the fear in her eyes, the same fear he had seen in Sarah's eyes during the storm. He knew what it was like to be helpless, to be at the mercy of forces beyond your control. The wind howled again, a mournful cry that echoed his own silent grief. He knew he couldn't turn away from Hana. He couldn't abandon her to the same fate that had befallen his family. He owed it to them, to Sarah and Caleb, to protect her, even if it meant breaking his vow of silence, even if it meant confronting the ghosts of his past. He sat up, the movement sending a jolt of pain through his shoulder. He looked at Hana, her back to him as she tended the fire. He cleared his throat, with a sound of rusty rasp in the silent room. He hadn't spoken in so long. He wasn't even sure if he could, but he had to try. For her. For them. He opened his mouth, the muscles in his jaw protesting. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. "Hana," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. Hana turned, startled by the sound of his voice. Her eyes widened, searching his face. She hadn't heard him speak before. She tilted her head, a question in her dark eyes. Cain swallowed, the dryness in his throat making it difficult to speak. He gestured towards the corral, then towards Widowmaker. "Ride," he managed, the word thick and unfamiliar on his tongue. Hana hesitated, then nodded slowly. She understood. He wanted her to learn to ride, to be able to defend herself. The next morning, as the sun painted the eastern sky in hues of rose and gold, Cain led Widowmaker into the corral. Hana followed, her black habit replaced, with a pair of Cain's worn trousers and a faded blue shirt. The sleeves rolled up to her elbows. The clothes were far too big for her, but they were practical. He showed her the basics, how to hold the reins, how to mount, how to guide the horse with gentle pressure. Hana listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was a quick learner, her movements precise and graceful, even in the oversized clothes. Her first attempt to mount was clumsy, her small frame struggling against the horse's height. She stumbled, nearly falling, but Cain was there to steady her. He placed his hands on her waist, lifting her effortlessly onto Widowmaker's back. The touch was fleeting, impersonal, but Hana felt a warmth spread through her cheeks. Once she was settled, Cain walked beside Widowmaker, guiding her around the corral. Hana held the reins tightly, her knuckles white. She was nervous, but determined. The horse seemed to sense her fear, moving slowly and deliberately. Cain spoke to her in short, clipped sentences, his voice still rough from disuse. Heels down, back straight, easy. Hana followed his instructions, her movements becoming more fluid with each passing moment. She began to relax, her grip on the reins loosening. She felt the horse's muscles moving beneath her, the rhythm of its gait, a soothing lullaby. As the days passed, Hana's confidence grew. She spent hours in the corral, practicing her riding skills. Cain watched her from the porch, a silent observer. He saw her initial clumsiness give way to a surprising aptitude, a natural connection to the horse and the land. It was as if she had been born to ride, her small frame perfectly balanced in the saddle. She learned to tend to the animals, to feed the chickens, to milk the cow, to gather eggs. She worked tirelessly, her hands calloused and strong. She spoke little, but her eyes conveyed her gratitude. She was learning the language of the land, a language of hard work and silent understanding. They communicated through gestures and shared tasks, a silent language blossoming between them. Cain would point to a tool, and Hana would fetch it. He would show her how to repair a fence, and she would follow his instructions. Their interactions were simple, practical, but they were building a connection, a fragile bridge across the chasm of their different backgrounds and experiences. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant colors of orange and purple, Hana rode Widowmaker to the top of the ridge overlooking the valley. She sat there for a long time, silhouetted against the fiery sky, her face turned towards the setting sun. Cain watched her from below, his heart aching with a feeling he couldn't quite name. The scene was a tableau of hope, a subtle sign that even in the harshest of landscapes, beauty could still be found, and perhaps even redemption. Days bled into weeks, the rhythm of life on Cain's ranch settling into a predictable cadence. Hana was becoming a part of the landscape, as natural as the wind-sculpted rocks and the endless expanse of sky. But the peace was a fragile thing, a thin veneer over the simmering tensions of the West. The first sign of trouble arrived on the wind, a whisper carried from the nearest town. Dust Gulch. A stranger had ridden in, a bounty hunter named Slade, they said. A hard man, with eyes like chips of flint and a reputation that preceded him like a dust devil. He was looking for someone, asking questions, stirring up trouble. Cain heard the news from a passing rider, a grizzled old rancher who stopped for water. The rancher eyed Hana with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion, then spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. Heard he's looking for a Jap woman, dressed up like a sister. Said she skipped out on some Chinaman's debt. Cain's jaw tightened. He knew who Slade was looking for. He offered the rancher a curt nod and sent him on his way, his mind already racing. He watched the rider disappear over the horizon, a dark silhouette against the setting sun. The West was full of men like Slade, men who preyed on the vulnerable, men who saw human life as a commodity to be bought and sold. He found Hana in the corral, grooming Widowmaker. She looked up as he approached, her dark eyes questioning. He couldn't tell her. Not yet. He didn't want to frighten her. He needed to assess the situation, to understand the threat. He spent the next few days watching the road, his rifle close at hand. He scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of Slade. He rode into Dust Gulch himself, a silent shadow slipping through the dusty streets. He listened to the whispers, piecing together the fragments of information. Slade was thorough, methodical. He had questioned everyone in town, from the saloon owner to the blacksmith. He had even visited the stagecoach depot, examining the passenger manifests. He was getting closer. Cain learned that Slade was offering a substantial reward for information leading to Hana's capture. Greed, he knew, was a powerful motivator. It wouldn't be long before someone betrayed her. The townsfolk, wary of Cain's silent demeanor and reclusive ways, offered little help. They eyed him with suspicion, their silence a wall of distrust. But Slade suspected Cain knew something. He had seen the way Cain watched him, the way his eyes narrowed when he spoke of the runaway Geisha. One evening, as Cain sat on the porch, cleaning his rifle, he saw a lone rider approaching in the distance. He recognized the silhouette immediately. It was Slade. He watched as the bounty hunter rode into the yard, his horse kicking up a cloud of dust. Slade dismounted, his movements slow and deliberate. He was a big man, with a weathered face and cold, calculating eyes. He wore a worn leather duster and a low-slung gun belt. "Cain," Slade said, his voice a low growl. "Heard you been keeping company with a nun. A Jap nun." Cain said nothing, his eyes fixed on Slade's face. He knew what was coming. Slade smiled, a cruel, humorless expression. "I'm looking for her. Heard she might be hiding out here. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Cain remained silent, his gaze unwavering. He knew any lie would be seen through. Slade was a predator, honed by years of tracking down desperate men and women. Slade took a step closer, his hand hovering near his gun. "Don't play coy with me, Cain. I know she's here. Save us both some trouble and hand her over." The air crackled with tension. Cain knew he couldn't fight Slade and win. The bounty hunter was too quick, too experienced. But he wouldn't surrender Hana, not without a fight. "She ain't here," Cain finally rasped, his voice rough and unused. The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. Slade chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Don't insult my intelligence, old man. I've been tracking her for weeks. The trail ends here." He gestured towards the house with his rifle. "I'm going to take a look around. You can either stand aside or—" He let the sentence hang in the air, the threat unspoken. Cain didn't move. He stood his ground, a silent sentinel blocking Slade's path. He knew this was it, the moment of truth. Slade sighed, a sound of mock resignation. "All right, Cain. You asked for it." He drew his gun, the metallic click echoing in the stillness. But before Slade could fire, a shot rang out from the house. Slade staggered, clutching his chest. A crimson stain bloomed on his shirt. He looked up in disbelief, his eyes wide with shock. Hana stood in the doorway, a smoking rifle in her hands. Her face was pale, but her eyes were filled with a fierce determination. She had learned to shoot, practiced in secret, driven by a primal need to protect herself and perhaps protect Cain. Slade crumpled to the ground, his gun clattering beside him. He gasped for air, his eyes fixed on Hana. "You, Jap!" he choked before falling silent. Cain rushed to Hana's side, his heart pounding in his chest. He took the rifle from her trembling hands. "You okay?" he managed, his voice filled with concern. Hana nodded, her eyes still wide with shock. I had to," she stammered. "He was going to hurt you." Cain pulled her close, holding her tightly. He didn't say anything. He just held her, grateful that she was safe. He had protected her, and she, in turn, had protected him. The roles had reversed, blurring the lines of savior and saved. Later that evening, after burying Slade in an unmarked grave, Hana was cleaning the house. She found herself drawn to Cain's room, a space he usually kept locked. Curiosity, a dangerous but undeniable impulse, gnawed at her. She knew he kept it locked for a reason. She found the key hidden beneath a loose floorboard, a secret compartment known only to Cain. With trembling hands, she unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was sparsely furnished, containing only a bed, a small table, and a trunk. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light, filtering through the window. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and unspoken grief. She opened the trunk, her heart pounding in her chest. Inside, she found a collection of mementos, a worn leather-bound Bible, a faded photograph of a young woman with a bright smile, and a small wooden toy horse. The woman in the photograph, it was Sarah. Beneath the photograph of Sarah was another smaller picture, a family portrait. Sarah, Cain, and a young boy, perhaps 5 or 6 years old. The boy had Cain's eyes and Sarah's smile. Caleb. Hana recognized the faint resemblance to Cain. A pang of sorrow shot through her. She knew then the depth of his loss, the reason for his silence. She picked up the photograph, her fingers tracing the outline of the boy's face. She understood now. The silence wasn't just a penance, it was a shield, a way to protect himself from the unbearable pain of his memories. She clutched the photograph to her chest, a wave of empathy washing over her. She saw past the stoic exterior, the hardened rancher, and saw the broken man beneath. Cain found her there later, kneeling beside the open trunk, the photograph clutched in her hand. He stood in the doorway, his face etched with pain. He hadn't meant for her to see. He hadn't wanted to burden her with his grief. He remained silent, his eyes pleading. He didn't know what to say. The raw grief that he usually kept locked away was now exposed, vulnerable, laid bare before her compassionate gaze. Hana rose slowly, her eyes meeting his. She didn't speak, but her expression conveyed understanding, empathy, and a profound sense of shared sorrow. She stepped towards him, closing the distance between them. She reached out and gently took his hand, her touch light and reassuring. She led him out of the room, back into the main house. She sat him down at the rough-hewn table, then disappeared into her small room. She returned a few moments later with a stack of paper and a charcoal pencil. Cain watched her, his brow furrowed in confusion. He didn't understand what she was doing. He simply sat there, his gaze fixed on her, waiting. Hana sat opposite him and began to draw. Her hand moved quickly and confidently across the paper, sketching a series of images. At first, they were abstract, swirling lines and shapes that hinted at turmoil and despair. But gradually the images began to take form, coalescing into a narrative. She drew a picture of a beautiful young woman, dressed in elaborate silk robes, her face adorned with delicate makeup. She was surrounded by other women, all similarly dressed, their faces carefully composed, their movements graceful and precise. But there was a sadness in their eyes, a hint of resignation. Then, she drew a picture of a stern-faced man, his eyes cold and cruel. He was dressed in rich garments and surrounded by servants. He held a fan in his hand, but his grip was tight, his knuckles white. He was watching the young woman with a possessive gaze. Cain watched in silence as Hana continued to draw, revealing her past in a series of stark, evocative images. She drew a picture of the young woman dancing, her movements fluid and captivating. But her eyes were vacant, her spirit detached. She was performing for an audience, but she was not free. She drew a picture of the young woman, being forced into a room, her face contorted with fear. The stern-faced man was there, his hand reaching out, his expression predatory. Then she drew the young woman escaping, fleeing through the dark streets, her robes torn, her makeup smeared. She was running for her life. She drew a picture of a ship sailing across a vast ocean. The young woman was on board, her face turned towards the horizon, her eyes filled with hope. But even in the new world, the shadow of her past haunted her. She drew the stern-faced man, now dressed in Western clothing, still pursuing her, his eyes filled with a relentless determination. Finally, she drew a picture of herself, standing in front of Cain's ranch, her face etched with weariness and fear. But there was also a glimmer of hope in her eyes, a sense that she had finally found a safe haven. As Hana finished the last drawing, a storm broke outside. The wind howled, rattling the windows. Rain lashed against the walls, mirroring the tempest of Hana's past. Thunder boomed in the distance, a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the ranch. Hana looked at Cain, her eyes filled with tears. She had revealed her deepest secrets, her most painful memories. She had placed herself in his hands, trusting him with her life. Cain looked at the drawings, then back at Hana. He understood now. He understood the depth of her suffering, the courage of her escape. He saw the vulnerability beneath her quiet demeanor, the strength that had allowed her to survive. He reached across the table and took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. He didn't say anything, but his eyes spoke volumes. He would protect her. He would keep her safe. He wouldn't let anyone hurt her again. He squeezed her hand tightly, then rose from the table. He walked to the window and looked out at the raging storm. The West was a harsh and unforgiving place, but it was also a place of second chances, a place where even the most broken souls could find redemption. And in that moment, as the storm raged around them, Cain knew that he would do everything in his power to help Hana find hers. The weight of her past now shared, now his burden too. The storm raged for hours, a symphony of wind and rain that echoed the turmoil within them both. Hana sat quietly at the table, watching Cain as he stood by the window, his silhouette stark against the flashes of lightning. She saw the resolve in his posture, the set of his jaw, and knew that he had made a decision that would change both of their lives. Finally, he turned from the window, his eyes meeting hers. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken emotions. He had kept silent for so long, a self-imposed exile from the world of words. But now, the weight of his silence felt heavier than ever, a barrier that needed to be broken. He walked towards her, his steps slow and deliberate. He knelt beside her, his eyes searching hers. He took her hand again, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. He looked deep into her eyes, seeking to convey the depth of his conviction. He took a deep breath, the air rattling in his lungs. He hadn't spoken more than a few words in years, and his voice felt rusty, unused. But he knew he had to speak. He had to tell her. "Hana," he rasped, his voice rough and unfamiliar, even to his own ears. She looked at him, her eyes wide with anticipation. He paused, gathering his thoughts, searching for the right words. You're safe here." The words were simple, but they carried a weight of meaning that resonated deep within her soul. She had been running for so long, haunted by fear and uncertainty. But now, hearing those words from Cain, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known was possible. He continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. "No one will hurt you here. I won't let them." He squeezed her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "You're safe with me." The words were a balm to her wounded spirit, a promise of protection, tone, and acceptance. Tears welled up in her eyes, but this time they were tears of relief, of gratitude. She reached out and touched his face, her fingers tracing the lines etched by time and hardship. "Cain," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you." He didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. His actions spoke louder than words. He rose from his knees and pulled her into his arms, holding her close. The warmth of his embrace enveloped her. chasing away the last vestiges of fear. In that moment, as the storm raged outside and the fire crackled in the hearth, they found solace in each other's arms. Two broken souls, drawn together by fate, finding healing and redemption in the vast, unforgiving landscape of the West. The warm glow of the fireplace painted long shadows on the walls, a visual promise of the hope that was slowly emerging from the darkness, a testament to the power of human connection to mend even the deepest wounds. The silence was gone, replaced by the quiet understanding that comes from shared pain and the promise of a shared future. The following morning dawned clear and cold, the storm having swept eastward, leaving behind a world washed clean. Cain knew the peace wouldn't last. Slade had allies, men who'd be asking questions when he didn't report back. He needed to go into town, to gauge the mood, to prepare. He didn't want to leave Hana, but staying put would only invite trouble to their doorstep. He found her tending the small garden she'd started near the creek, her hands already stained with earth. He watched her for a moment, the sunlight catching in her dark hair. He knew this land, this small patch of green, was a fragile attempt to rebuild, to plant roots in a place that had offered her little kindness. "I need to go to town," he said, his voice low. Hana straightened, wiping her hands on her apron. "Is it about Slade?" Cain nodded. "He won't be missed, but questions will be asked. I need to see what's being said." She looked at him, her eyes filled with concern. "Be careful, Cain." He offered a rare, small smile. "Always am." The town of Redemption was little more than a collection of dusty buildings huddled around a muddy main street. Cain tied his horse to the rail outside the saloon. The familiar creak of leather, a stark contrast to the boisterous sounds emanating from within. He pushed through the swinging doors, the smells of stale beer and tobacco smoke hitting him like a wall. The saloon was half full, a mix of ranchers, miners, and drifters nursing their morning drinks. Cain scanned the room, his gaze sharp and assessing. He spotted him near the back, a hulking figure leaning against the bar. Jed, one of Slade's known associates. Cain moved towards the bar, his boots soundless on the sawdust-covered floor. He ordered a whiskey, his eyes never leaving Jed. The tension in the room was palpable, a silent undercurrent of anticipation. He took a slow sip of his whiskey, the burn of familiar comfort. Then he heard the voice. "Well, well, well, if it ain't the silent rancher." Cain turned to see Jed standing behind him, his face flushed with anger. "Heard you was asking about Slade," Jed said, his voice a low growl. "You wouldn't happen to know where he is, would you?" Cain met Jed's gaze, his own expression unreadable. "Haven't seen him." Jed chuckled, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "Don't play coy with me, Cain. Slade was tracking a Jap woman. Heard she was heading this way. You wouldn't be hiding her, would you?" The word hung in the air, a venomous slur that cut through the noise of the saloon. Cain's hand tightened around his glass, the knuckles turning white. He knew this was it, the confrontation he'd been dreading. "She ain't here," Cain said, his voice low and dangerous. Jed stepped closer, his hand resting on the butt of his gun. "You're lying, old man. Slade wouldn't just disappear. He found her, and you helped her." "Slade was a bounty hunter," Cain said, his voice unwavering. "He made enemies." "He was a friend," Jed spat, his eyes narrowed. "And you're gonna tell me where he is, or you're gonna regret it." The saloon had gone silent, all eyes on the two men facing off. The clinking of glasses ceased. The murmur of conversations died down. The only sound was the crackling of the fire in the hearth, a counterpoint to the simmering rage in the room. Cain knew he couldn't back down. Not now, Not ever. He wouldn't let them take Hana. He set his whiskey glass down on the bar, the sound echoing in the silence. He looked at Jed, his eyes cold and hard. "You want to find Slode," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Look in the shallow grave, west of my ranch." Jed's face contorted with rage. "You killed him," he snarled, his hand now gripping his revolver. Cain didn't flinch. He'd expected this. The truth, however delivered, was never going to be welcome. The air in the saloon thickened, heavy with the promise of violence. Before Jed could draw, Cain moved. Years of hard labor and a life lived close to the land had honed him into a man of surprising speed and strength. He slammed his fist into Jed's jaw, the force of the blow sending the larger man staggering backward. The saloon erupted in chaos. Chairs overturned, glasses shattered, and the air filled with shouts and curses. Cain didn't stay to fight. He knew he was outnumbered. His only chance was to get back to Hana, to warn her, and to get them both away from redemption before Jed and his cronies could organize a posse. He burst through the swinging doors and sprinted towards the livery stable, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind him. He saddled his horse with practiced efficiency, ignoring the growing shouts and the sight of men spilling out of the saloon. He swung into the saddle and spurred the horse into a gallop, heading back towards the ranch, the wind whipping through his graying hair. He reached the ranch just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. Hana was waiting for him, her face etched with worry. She saw the urgency in his eyes and knew immediately that something was wrong. "We have to go," Cain said, his voice breathless. "Slade's men are coming." Hana didn't hesitate. She'd packed a small bag with essentials, anticipating this moment. She grabbed her rifle and followed Cain to the barn, where he was already saddling her mare. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice calm despite the fear churning inside her. "West," Cain said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Towards the mountains. It's the only chance we have." They rode hard through the night, the moon their only guide. Cain chose a route that was difficult and treacherous, hoping to throw their pursuers off the trail. They crossed rocky ridges, navigated dense forests, and forded icy streams. The land was unforgiving, testing their endurance at every turn. Hana, despite her delicate appearance, proved to be surprisingly resilient. She'd learned to ride and shoot during her time in the West, and she possessed a quiet determination that belied her fragile frame. She kept pace with Cain, her eyes alert, her senses attuned to the dangers of the wilderness. As dawn broke, they reached the foothills of the mountains, a vast and imposing landscape of jagged peaks and deep canyons. Cain knew they couldn't outrun Slade's men forever. They needed to find a place to hide, a place where they could make a stand. He spotted a narrow canyon, hidden behind a screen of trees. It was a risky choice, a potential trap, but it offered the best chance of defense. He led Hana into the canyon, the silence broken only by the sound of their horses' hooves on the rocky ground. This was their sanctuary, at least for now. But they knew it wouldn't be long before the hunt began again. The West rarely offered true escape. Cain secured the horses in a hidden alcove, camouflaging their tracks with fallen branches. The canyon walls rose sharply on either side, providing natural cover. He found a small cave, barely large enough for the two of them, and told Hana to stay put. He would scout the area, find a vantage point, and watch for any sign of pursuit. He climbed the canyon wall with the agility of a mountain goat, his weathered hands finding purchase on the rough rock. He reached the top and surveyed the landscape. The sun was climbing higher in the sky, baking the earth and turning the air shimmering hot. He saw nothing but endless stretches of scrub brush and jagged peaks, He felt a momentary sense of relief, but he knew it wouldn't last. They were being hunted, and the hunters were relentless. He made his way back down to the cave, his senses on high alert. He found Hana tending a small fire, boiling water for coffee. The smell was comforting, a small reminder of normalcy in a world gone mad. "Anything?" she asked, her eyes searching his. Cain shook his head. "Nothing yet, but they'll be coming." He joined her by the fire, accepting a tin cup of coffee. The bitter liquid burned his throat, but it helped to clear his head. He thought about their options, which were few. They could try to make a run for it, but they would be exposed, vulnerable in the open desert. They could stay in the canyon and try to defend themselves, but they would be trapped, surrounded. He knew he had to make a decision, and he had to make it fast. He trusted his gut, the instincts that had kept him alive for so long. He looked at Hana, her face pale but resolute. He couldn't let anything happen to her. He wouldn't. He stood up, his movements deliberate. "I'm going to set up some defenses," he said. "Tripwires, warning signs. Give us a little time." Hana nodded, her eyes filled with trust. "Be careful, Cain." He spent the next few hours rigging up a series of makeshift traps and alarms. He used wire to connect tin cans to bushes, creating a noisy warning system. He scattered sharp rocks and thorny branches along the canyon floor, making it difficult for anyone to approach unseen. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He felt a sense of unease, a prickling sensation on the back of his neck. He couldn't explain it, but he knew he was being watched. He was wrong. The warning came not from his crude defenses, but from a voice laced with venomous familiarity. "Well, Cain, always did figure you for a fool. But this is pathetic." Cain whirled around, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. Standing at the mouth of the canyon was Jeb, flanked by two other men, and between them, tied and gagged, was Silas, an old prospector who'd shared coffee and stories with Cain for years. Silas, his eyes wide with fear, mouthed a silent apology. Jeb grinned, a cruel, predatory expression. "Silas here told us all about your little hideaway. Seems he had a debt to settle, and Slade's boys were offering a generous price." The betrayal hit Cain like a physical blow. He'd trusted Silas, considered him a friend. Now, that trust lay shattered, replaced by a bitter taste of disillusionment. "Let her go, Jeb," Cain said, his voice low and dangerous. Jeb laughed. "Not a chance, old man. We want the Japanese woman, and we're gonna get her, one way or another." Suddenly a shot rang out. Hana, defying his orders, had emerged from the cave, rifle in hand. She fired at Jeb, the bullet whizzing past his head. The other men returned fire, forcing her to retreat back into the cave. Cain knew he was outgunned, outmaneuvered. He had to get Hana out of there. He charged forward, firing his rifle, hoping to create a diversion. He managed to take down one of Jeb's men, but the other two were too quick. Jeb tackled him to the ground, wresting the rifle from his grasp. Cain fought back with a ferocity born of desperation, but he was no match for Jeb's superior strength. Jeb slammed Cain's head against a rock, and darkness descended. He heard Jeb's triumphant shout, the sound of Hana's screams, and then nothing. When Cain awoke, the sun was setting, casting long, ominous shadows across the canyon. His head throbbed. When Cain awoke, the sun was setting, casting long, ominous shadows across the canyon. His head throbbed, a dull ache that resonated through his skull. He tasted blood in his mouth, felt the grit of dirt embedded in his skin. Hana. The name clawed at his throat, a raw, desperate plea. He pushed himself up, his body screaming in protest. Every muscle ached, every joint throbbed. He stumbled towards the cave, his heart pounding with dread. The cave was empty. Hana was gone. Rage, cold and consuming, filled the void where fear had been. It was a different kind of rage than he'd felt before, a focused, unwavering determination. This wasn't about protecting a stranger anymore. This was personal. He found Jed's discarded cigarette butt, still smoldering slightly. They hadn't gone far. He followed their tracks, the prints of horses and boots leading deeper into the canyon. The air grew thick with the scent of fear and desperation. He found them at the end of the canyon, in a small clearing bathed in the fading light. Jeb was there, along with the surviving gunman, Silas cowering behind them. Hana was tied to a tree, her face bruised and swollen, her eyes filled with defiance. "Well, look who decided to join the party," Jeb sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "Thought we'd seen the last of you, old man." Cain didn't say a word. He simply looked at Hana, a silent promise passing between them. Then he turned his gaze to Jeb, his eyes burning with a cold, hard fury. "Let her go," Cain said, his voice barely a whisper, yet carrying the weight of a thunderclap. Jeb laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You got nothing to bargain with, old man. You're beaten, broken. Just give up." Cain didn't move. He stood there, a solitary figure silhouetted against the dying light, a storm gathering within him. He took a slow, deliberate breath, and the world seemed to fall silent. Then he moved. He was a whirlwind of motion, a blur of speed and violence. He launched a rock, hard and true, at Silas's head. The prospector crumpled to the ground without a sound. The gunman, startled, turned his attention to Cain, raising his rifle. But Cain was already on him. He disarmed him with a swift, brutal move, the force of the blow sending the rifle flying. He grabbed the gunman by the throat, his fingers tightening, cutting off his air. The gunman struggled, kicking and clawing, but Cain held on, his grip unyielding. Jeb watched in disbelief as his man choked and gasped, his face turning purple. He reached for his own gun, but it was too late. Cain snapped the gunman's neck with a sickening crack and tossed the body aside. He turned to Jeb, his face a mask of grim determination. Jeb fired, the bullet whistling past Cain's ear. Cain didn't flinch. He charged forward, his fist connecting with Jeb's jaw with brutal force. Jeb staggered backward, his gun falling from his grasp. Cain didn't give him a chance to recover. He unleashed a flurry of blows, each one precise, each one deadly. Jeb crumpled to the ground, groaning in pain. Cain stood over him, his eyes filled with a cold, unforgiving rage. He picked up Jeb's gun, his hand steady. He pointed it at Jeb's head. "This is for Hana," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. He pulled the trigger. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the canyon, a final, brutal punctuation mark on the night. The echo faded, leaving a ringing silence broken only by Hana's ragged breaths. Jeb lay still, a dark stain blooming on the parched earth. Cain lowered the gun, his gaze sweeping over Hana, assessing her injuries. Bruises blossomed on her face, her kimono torn and soiled, but her spirit remained unbroken. But as Cain approached, a flicker of something other than fear sparked in her eyes. It wasn't hope, not exactly, but a grim determination. She subtly shifted her weight, testing the ropes that bound her to the tree. He reached for her, intending to cut her free, but she stopped him with a sharp, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Her eyes darted towards the body of Silas, lying awkwardly in the dirt. Cain understood. A potential weapon. "Cain," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "The pin." He frowned, confused. Then, he remembered. During their journey, Hana had shown him a small, intricately carved hairpin she always kept tucked within her obi. She'd explained, almost as an afterthought, that it wasn't just decorative. It was sharpened, honed, a last resort. He followed her gaze. Silas's body lay close enough. With a sigh, he moved toward the body. Cain knew he had to act quickly. He knelt beside Silas, feigning to check for a pulse. As he did, he discreetly reached for the hairpin, his fingers brushing against the cold metal. He palmed it, concealing it in his hand. Returning to Hana, he knelt before her, his body blocking the view from the surrounding canyon walls. He brought his hand to her face, as if to comfort her. "Hold still," he murmured, his voice low. As he pretended to brush a stray strand of hair from her face, he pressed the hairpin into her palm, his fingers closing around hers in a brief, reassuring squeeze. Hana's fingers tightened around the tiny weapon. She lowered her head, concealing her actions behind a curtain of dark hair. The setting sun, a molten orange disk sinking below the western horizon, cast long, dramatic shadows across the clearing. The air crackled with tension. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Cain stood guard, his senses on high alert, scanning the surrounding terrain. He knew that Jeb might have allies nearby, men waiting for a signal, men who would be drawn by the sound of gunfire. Suddenly Hana cried out, a sharp, piercing scream that echoed through the canyon. Cain whirled around, his gun raised, ready to defend her. Hana thrashed against her bonds, feigning panic. "Help me, please, help me," she screamed, her voice filled with desperation. Cain watched her, his eyes narrowed. He knew she was acting, but he couldn't be sure what she was planning. Was this a trap? Was she trying to lure someone out of hiding? Then he saw it. A subtle movement, a flicker of steel in the fading light. Hana, with incredible dexterity, had used the hairpin to saw through the ropes that bound her wrists. With a final desperate heave, she broke free. She lunged forward, grabbing a discarded rock, and hurled it with surprising force at a nearby boulder. The rock struck the boulder with a loud crack, sending a shower of sparks into the air. The diversion worked. Any potential observers would be drawn to the noise, distracted by the sudden commotion. Now was the time. Hana knew it would be hard for her to run in her kimono. She threw off the outer layer of her kimono. She can move easier now. Cain understood. He grabbed Jeb's rifle, ready to cover her escape. Hana scrambled to her feet, discarding the heavy kimono that hampered her movement. The cool night air bit at her skin, but she ignored it, adrenaline surging through her veins. Cain, rifle raised, stood between her and the open canyon, a silent guardian against unseen threats. "Go," he rasped, his voice strained. "Get out of here." She hesitated, her gaze locking with his. She saw not just the hardened gunslinger, but a man who had risked everything for her, a man who had shown her a kindness she hadn't thought existed in this harsh land. "I won't leave you," she said, her voice firm. Cain shook his head, his eyes pleading. "There's nothing left for me here. Just go. Find a new life. Be free." Before she could argue, a voice boomed from the shadows. "Well, well, well. Looks like the little Jap woman has some fight in her after all." A figure emerged from behind a cluster of rocks, tall and imposing, his face etched with cruelty. "Slade?" He held a rifle in his hand, its barrel glinting in the moonlight. "This ends now," Slade snarled, his eyes fixed on Hana. "You're coming with me one way or another." Cain stepped forward, blocking Slade's path. "You'll have to go through me first," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Slade laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Don't be a fool, old man. You're already dead. Just step aside, and maybe I'll let the woman live." Cain didn't answer. He simply raised his rifle, his finger tightening on the trigger. The two men stood facing each other, locked in a deadly standoff. The air crackled with tension, the silence broken only by the rustling of the wind. Then, Slide moved. He fired his rifle, the bullet ripping through the night air. Cain flinched, but he didn't fall. He returned fire, his shot finding its mark. Slade staggered backward, clutching his chest. But Slade was not defeated. He raised his rifle again, his eyes burning with hatred. He fired a second time, the bullet striking Cain in the stomach. Cain gasped, his body convulsing. He dropped his rifle and collapsed to the ground, his lifeblood staining the parched earth. Hana screamed, her voice filled with anguish. She rushed to his side, cradling his head in her lap. "Cain, no!" she cried, tears streaming down her face. Slade watched them, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Looks like your hero's run out of time," he sneered. Hana ignored him. She held Cain close, her fingers tracing the lines on his weathered face. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for everything." Cain looked at her, his eyes filled with a gentle warmth. He reached out and touched her face, his hand trembling. "Don't waste it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Live." Hana leaned down and kissed him, her tears mingling with his blood. "I love you," she said, her voice filled with a raw, aching emotion she had never allowed herself to feel before. A single tear rolled down Cain's cheek, a silent acknowledgement of her words, of the love he had finally allowed himself to embrace. Then his eyes closed, and his hand fell limp. Cain was gone. Slade, weakened but still defiant, tried to rise, intent on finishing what he started. But Hana, fueled by grief and rage, seized a rock and brought it down on his head with savage force. He crumpled to the ground, lifeless. Hana remained there, cradling Cain's lifeless body, the vast expanse of the night sky looming above them. The wind whispered through the canyon, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and the echo of gunfire. She would mourn him, but she would also honor his sacrifice by living the free life he envisioned for her. The West remained wild, unforgiving, but in that small clearing, a seed of hope had been planted, watered by tears and fertilized by courage. It would take root, and it would bloom. The first rays of dawn kissed the canyon walls, painting them in hues of rose and gold. Hana, her face streaked with dust and tears, began her task. Cain deserved a place of rest, befitting the man he was, a silent guardian, a reluctant hero. She couldn't leave him in the dirt, carrion for buzzards. She chose a hilltop overlooking the valley, a place where the wind sang through the tall grass, and the sun seemed to linger longest. It was a place of quiet dignity, a fitting sanctuary for a man who had lived his life on the periphery, yet possessed a heart of quiet strength. Using a shovel she found in the abandoned shack, she dug. The earth was hard and unforgiving, but she labored with a fierce determination. Each scoop of dirt was a testament to her grief, a tangible expression of the love she had found, and so quickly lost. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the landscape, the grave took shape. It was simple, unadorned, but it was made with love and respect. She lined the bottom with smooth stones, a small act of reverence in a land where death was often brutal and anonymous. Gently she lifted Cain's body, his weight surprisingly light in her arms. She carried him to the grave, her steps slow and deliberate, each footfall a prayer. Lowering him into the earth, she arranged his arms across his chest, his weathered hands resting peacefully. She covered him with the earth she had so painstakingly removed, each handful a silent goodbye. When the grave was filled, she placed a simple wooden cross at its head, carved from a piece of scrap lumber. She had no name to write, no dates to mark his passage. Cain was a man of the West, his story etched not on stone, but on the land itself. Kneeling before the grave, she closed her eyes, memories flooding her mind. She remembered his quiet gaze, the way he moved with a silent grace, the unexpected kindness he had shown her. She remembered the feel of his hand in hers, the warmth of his embrace, the whispered words of love that had come too late. He had given her a chance, a new beginning, in a land that had taken everything from her. She would honor his memory by staying, by tending to the land, by finding her own strength in the harsh beauty of the West. She thought of the ranch, neglected and overgrown, a reflection of Cain's own solitary existence. It would be a daunting task to rebuild it, to bring life back to the barren fields, but she was not afraid. She had faced death, she had survived hardship, and she had found love in the most unexpected of places. With renewed determination, she rose to her feet. The sun was high in the sky now, bathing the landscape in a golden light. She turned her gaze toward the ranch, its dilapidated buildings silhouetted against the horizon. It was a challenge, a test of her will, but it was also an opportunity, a chance to create a new life, a life worthy of the sacrifice Cain had made. The wind whispered through the tall grass, carrying Cain's memory across the plains. It was a lonely sound, a mournful lament, but it was also a song of hope, a promise of renewal. Hana took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the crisp, clean air of the West. She would stay. She would rebuild. She would live. She would honor Cain's memory by finding her own strength, her own purpose in this wild and unforgiving land. She would become the woman he saw in her, the woman he believed she could be.